Joining us now, congressional candidate for New York's 12th district, Erica Vladimir. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
It's great to have you here. So this is the first time that you've been on the show, and generally the first time we talk to a candidate, we want to get to know them a little bit. We have a lot of candidates in this cycle who have not run for public office before. You have not, but you have worked in government, correct?
That's correct. I worked for the New York State Senate, and then I also worked for New York City's independent budget office.
So how would you say that influences you now running for office?
I think it's a huge influence. As someone who has a perspective and understands what happens on the inside of closed doors, I know firsthand how government continually shuts out the very voices that need to be at the table. And if general people saw how laws are negotiated and drafted, I really think that they would be horrified, and it's time to change that system.
And in particular, over the past few years, we've learned a lot about New York state politics, and it really does, it's had a reputation, obviously, for a very long time of having party machines and corruption, things like that, and it certainly does seem to be that way. Do you think that having some witnessing that might inform, if you become a congressperson, the sort of corruption and that sort of thing that we see at the national level?
Yeah, and I think not only witnessing corruption and rampant abuse and harassment and discrimination, but also my experience as an advocate in helping reform those and to overhaul the New York State human rights laws to increase those protections. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but I saw how advocates, when they start pounding on that door and saying, we are not going to go away, and being able to have partners on the inside from a new generation of elected officials, putting all of that together is how we're going to get the reform that we need, not just here in New York State, but also in Congress.
And so what about your platform? What are some of the issues that you're going to be stressing during this run?
I am certainly going to be stressing education. Education policy is why I went to law school. It's why I wanted to work in New York State government, and also what I worked on when I was working for the city. I think we need to fully fund the Individuals with Disability Education Act. We need to ensure that everybody gets access to a free, appropriate public education. And I also think we need to increase Title I-A funding, which is one of the biggest funding streams for public schools from the federal government. And then, of course, I'll also be fighting for the same workplace protections against harassment and discrimination that I fought for here on the state level in Congress.
And I definitely want to return to that topic in just a moment. But first, this is a primary field that already, as a lot of New York ones are, has multiple candidates in it, including one who's the current incumbent, Carolyn Maloney, who's held onto the seat effectively for 14 terms, so very long-lasting incumbent. How does that influence your race, going up against someone who is well known in the area?
I think the fact that she has been there for so long is indicative of why we need new representation and why we need new leadership here in New York 12 and also across the country in various congressional districts. We need new, fresh perspectives that are actually going to embody and illustrate where society is going, what it means to be an inclusive, compassionate community. And we're going to need new voices to do that.
I certainly couldn't agree more. In this particular case, though, with Carolyn Maloney, what would you say are some of the biggest policy distinctions between yourself and the incumbent?
I think what we would be focusing on is certainly different. As a Congress member, I would be focusing on education and reinvesting in education. I would also be looking just to take what we have seen on the congressional level farther steps and really pushing for that bold reform, and also pushing against leadership, because that's not what we're seeing from our current representation. We have representatives who are really comfortable in their seats. The status quo has benefited them for so long, and they're worried about keeping those seats. We need a representative who is going to be bold, who is willing to put themselves out there for the marginalized communities that have not had a seat at the table for far too long. And this includes communities like sex workers. And so they deserve a seat at the table when we are talking about decriminalizing sex work, not just on a state, but a national level. We haven't been seeing this bold leadership from our current representation.
So let's turn now to the work that you did after you resigned from government service back in 2015. You formed an organization. Can you tell us about that experience?
Sure. So I am a co-founder, although no longer a member of the sexual harassment working group. And we are 8 former legislative staffers, all who either experienced harassment, assault, discrimination, or retaliation at the hands of elected and appointed officials. We were the voices that were shut out from the very process, from the very policies that our elected officials were trying to advance on behalf of us in our name. And yet they wouldn't listen to why we believed that these laws that they were looking to pass would not have helped us in our current circumstances. And so by working together based off our own experiences, by working with advocates who have been fighting for these workplace protections against harassment and discrimination for years, we really did some strong coalition building. And we had amazing partners on the inside, again, from new, fresh perspectives, from a new generation of elected officials that was really driven by thoughtful, ambitious women. And together we were able to overhaul the state human rights law in 1 year, which is unheard of in New York State.
You know, I think back to when the Me Too movement was ramping up and there was this sort of reckoning in multiple different industries. And I remember hearing some like whispers about this sort of thing happening in Congress. There was some implications from some serving politicians about experiences they'd had. And it really feels like now in hindsight, aside from 1 or 2 standout cases, that we didn't really learn that much. And it doesn't seem like there was that much reform considering what it seemed like was a lot of evidence that something was going on there. If you get elected, do you see yourself continuing the work that you've done previously in that organization inside of the House, inside of Congress?
Yeah, absolutely. While I think we need to strengthen workplace protections against harassment and discrimination on a national level, I would certainly be focusing inside Congress, inside the House itself. We need to reform the rules. We need to, continue to strengthen the Congressional Accountability Act. We need to close loopholes like the one in Title VII that right now allows state entities to say that certain legislative staffers are not actually employees of the state. We just saw that here in the New York Times. It was written about today. And so there's definitely a lot to be done on the federal level, but also inside Congress. And I will certainly be, leading that and working with those who have experienced harassment and discrimination.
Oh, I think it's been a long time coming. Erica Vladimir, congressional candidate for New York's 12th district. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.